Today, what I want to discuss is the Sodder family fire, which happened Christmas Eve 1945. This is an old case. Um, I heard about this case, but I was not very familiar with it until I was reached out by a family member of the Sodder family who asked that I would look at it. Now, I want to preface this by saying, throughout, I don't know, my 20-year career of working on cold cases, I can always tell when I'm asked to look at a case whether a person is biased or not. And being biased is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, I think it's bad when you're an investigator and you have a bias one way or another before going in. And that's why a lot of times I don't want to know any of the details when people give me the cases. I don't want to know your opinion, but after doing so many and receiving so many from family members and other people, you can tell through a voice conversation or an email whether a person is biased and they have a certain feeling one way or another, even without them coming out and saying that. So that is difficult to navigate for me because you never want to hurt somebody's feelings, especially a family member who has gone through a tragedy so much already. But the flip side of that is that and this is just me, would never and have never jeopardized my integrity for investigations by appeasing a person. Meaning, there are individuals who will go along with the narrative that the person is giving them. They feel a certain way, so I'm going to feel a certain way, and my investigation is biased because of that. And to maintain harmony and make everything okay between the two of us, I'm going to agree with your findings and get on board. I've never been that way. And because of that, I hate to say you make enemies, because I certainly don't feel like I'm an enemy of anybody, and I don't want that. But they certainly, when you don't agree with their findings, they feel a certain way towards you. And I understand that because they've gone so long with just really believing a certain narrative. And there's nothing wrong with that. And then when they reach out to me and say, hey, can you look at this? They are expecting me to agree with them and see the same things they see. And maybe I do see the same things they see, but I interpret those things differently. And that is going to lead me into my findings in the Sodder family fire. So with that being said, let's get into this. And again, this is just my opinion, and you can take it for what it's worth. You believe, I don't debate, and that's one big thing, that a rule that I made a long time ago, because you cannot. It's not my job to convince you. Hey, this is what I see, and these are the reasons why. You can believe them, interpret them any way you want, disregard them. But most of the time you don't. You come back at me by saying, well, what about this? What about this? And I can explain that. And then you'll say, but because of this, it's this. And you never win. Now, it's not about winning or losing. It's just my expert opinion. And you can do with it whatever you like. I certainly don't like bad blood. And I had that happen to me with a fire is ironically another fire case happened in the, I want to say 1980s, for a girl that I looked at, and she just was so nice to me because I was looking at her case, pro bono, all these things. But when I didn't agree with her findings, boy, she turned on me quick. And hey, that's part of this, I guess. But I will never, ever compromise my integrity to appease somebody. I think you get more respect by not doing that. But again, never trying to hurt somebody's feelings. It's just my opinions. So on Christmas Eve, 1945, the Sodder family, which consisted of 10 children, I believe 9 of which were all in the house. There was only one, Joe, who was in the Army, who was not in the house that night. A fire started. The timeline I have here, the fire was around 1 a.m., which would have been on Christmas Day. And the fire was not extinguished until 8 a.m. Correction. Fire company did not arrive until 8 a.m. 9 to 10 a.m., the fire is put out. So the fire burns for a good 8-9 hours. Now, what makes this case unique and mysterious, when it doesn't really have to be so mysterious. No, I take that back. It is mysterious because none of the children that died in the fire were ever found. That's what makes this case unique. You have 10 children. Not all 10 children perished, okay? The mother, the father, and a few of the children made it out. And I'll go through who did and who didn't here in a little bit. But 5 children disappeared, okay? Nowhere to be found. And when they sifted through the remains in this house, no bones, no remains were ever found. Hence the mystery, okay? Now, there's some particulars that I'm going to get into, some red flags, some things that I see, and eventually I'm going to give you my deductions. In this case, as much as any case that I've ever looked at, you really have to rely on possibilities versus probabilities in order to get the answer here. And I will walk you through that so you can see what I see. Now, again, I was given access to a lot of official documents. Hard to come by, since 1945. But through the years, this case has been looked at and revisited by officials. I tried to rely on as close to 1945 or 1945 in this case as I could versus 2023. Okay, because you're going to get more of the correct facts, like witness statements, things like that. DNA, I'm not talking about. Obviously, you didn't have DNA in 1945, but I'm talking about report-wise. Witnesses and statements are more apt to be correct in 1945 versus 2023. So that's what I relied on in these documents. And I promised that I would not give out these documents. Much like the Riverside Sherry Joe Bates case. And although I had my issues with the detectives from Riverside, regardless of how much I like, or in this case maybe dislike, some of the detectives there, when I give my word, I'm not going to break that. And then when I told them I would not give out these police reports, I meant that. Same way here. I'm not going to release any of these reports, but I can talk about what I have read. So on this case, let's start with, I guess, a victimology. Now, it's very hard to go through an entire victimology of 12 individuals who lived on this, I think it was a farm, referred to as the Sodder farm. So, but listen, you have 10 children, 9 of which are in the house, and you have a mom and a dad who are married. It was Christmas. I think that's important as well because it's a milestone event in somebody's history. Let me say that because there was no bones, supposedly, allegedly, no remains found of the children who did not make it out of that house, there is basically one other option, right? Kidnapped. And that's the narrative that I think a lot of people have put forward in this. So I want to look at that and see if that's possible, if it's probable, why, how, what's the evidence for, what's the evidence against. Because it's either that or somehow they perished in this fire and no bones were found. That's it. Those are the only two choices, right? I guess you could put in there the family, meaning the mom and dad, murdered the children somehow in that house that night. That's something that obviously should be looked at. But to have 5 kids disappear in the middle of the night with no trace, no evidence, no witnesses, some people would say it was an alien abduction. Now, although I do believe in UFOs, I think that is a ridiculous point of view for this case. Let's start with the timeline then, since victimology is not going to give us much other than, hey, they weren't in debt. There wasn't an insurance type of setup. There was no insurance on any of the children. So, I mean, there's certain things that we can just get rid of right off the bat. One, if you look at the victimology, George and I believe Jamie was the wife's name, they were very good parents. The emotions that they went through, their actions previous to these murders, I'm so used to saying murders, to these disappearances, to years after, were all indicative to me of a grieving parent. And I'll get into more of that as I go forward. And I just want to write that down here to make sure that I don't forget to talk about their grief going forward, because that is important, and you'll see why. So on Christmas Eve, the kids were giving their toys, and I don't know why that is, whether that was a tradition to do that on Christmas Eve versus Christmas Day. I'm not sure. But according to the statements from the parents and surviving members who made it out of that house, and we'll get into each one of them, they said the kids were playing the last that the parents had seen them, and that was at 10:30 at night. Parents retired to bed. Kids were upstairs, and I guess they were preparing for bed as well. At 12:30 a.m., there was a phone call into the Sodder family home. And the mom answered and said, you have the wrong number. That person was identified. Now, people will throw that out as, hey, that's something spooky that happened. That person was identified. They said, hey, I called the wrong number. Okay. At 1 a.m., or I'm sorry, the phone call was at 12:30. Around between 12:30 and 1 o'clock, the mom said, I heard something hit the top of the roof of the house. At 1 a.m., witnesses saw of the fire. So you have an independent witness who sees this house ablaze at 1 a.m. Let's go back inside the Sodder home. And at between 12:30 1 o'clock, mom says she wakes up and she sees the blaze, the fire. And the fire is on the first floor in an office area where the telephone is. She tries to reach it. It's too hot. The fire pushes her back. She yells for her husband, who gets up. They go outside. They yell for the kids. Two of the kids, John and George, come down. They make it out. They try to re-enter. They try to do a bunch of things to get back into the house to get to their children, and they are unsuccessful. The fire company is called, sure what time I have that written down, shortly after 1 a.m., and they don't get there till 8. The fire marshal really blew it on this one. You know, I know things were different in 1945 compared to now, but you don't show up for 7 hours later because you said there was bad weather. I mean, to me, you should be fired on the spot. That's your job. And you just say, well, yeah, we're aware of it. And that's what you said. But the weather's bad and we'll get out there. That is unprofessional, and it's sickening, you know, really. But they don't arrive until 8 a.m. I want to next look at what happens after the fire is extinguished. The remains of the fire are searched. There is conflicting reports from what I read of what was found, which is not much. Listen, when I was in kindergarten, I might have been in first grade, my house burnt down to the ground. My mom heard something. She heard glass breaking, and she thought somebody was breaking into our home. She woke up my father, who went out, and when he got to the hallway, the whole bottom floor was engulfed. Luckily, there was nobody down there. Me and my sister were asleep upstairs, and my mom grabbed me, my dad grabbed my sister, and we had a big television antenna that went up that was attached to the house, and we were able to get to that, and my mom and dad saved our lives and got us out. But I remember a little bit of that. But we took pictures of the house, and of course I have audio, stories being passed down as I grew up about that fire and how devastating it was, and how it nothing left, coins, things like that, that I was able to see through pictures as well. But the point is, I have some experience with a fire. And when they were going through this fire, they found no remains. Where's the kids? Okay. Where are the kids that didn't make it out? The kids that didn't make it out. I want this to sink in. Maurice, one of the boys, 15 years old. Martha, a girl, 12 years old. Lewis, I'm sorry. Boy, 9 years old. Jenny, a girl, 8 years old. And Betty, a girl, 6 years old. Those are the ones that did not make it out. Now, it's very important to note where they were. They were all upstairs sleeping in the various rooms. There's 2 bedrooms upstairs. And this is the layout of the house, so you can see it. I have it labeled here. You have a girl's room and you have a boy's room up there. As you can see, everybody that was in the girl's room, Martha, Jenny, Betty, all missing. The boys' room, you have 2 out of the 4 that are missing. Maurice and Lewis. Sorry, I keep saying Lois. But what's very important here, is not everybody in the upstairs are missing. You have 2, as you can see there, John, 23, and George, 16, who made it out. So their statements are going to be very important. But just based off of this, what I just went over and what you see here, what can you tell that's very important? The 2 oldest individuals made it out. Okay? It's the younger ones that did not make it out. So downstairs, you have people that survived and made it out. In Mom and Dad's bedroom, you have Mom and Dad. They both make it out. You have Sylvia, a 2-year-old, who is rescued by, I believe, is it Marion? 18-year-old female who was sleeping downstairs on the couch. She went in and grabbed Sylvia, if I'm not mistaken, and saved her life. So everybody downstairs lives or is not missing at the least. That's going to be important as well as we move forward. Four days later, after nothing, well, let me back up because it would be not true if I say nothing was found. An organ was found in that fire, in the remains. Now that organ was found by an individual, a fire chief named Morse. He stated that he found a liver. Now that is corroborated by an individual, and I want to say that it was, I don't think I have the name written down of who it was, Cipriani, who I believe was actually a brother or brother-in-law of Mr. Sodder. Regardless of his relation, that doesn't matter. The person's identified. His last name is Cipriani. He says, hey, when I was there in the morning going through the remains of the house, someone, I don't know who, showed me in a bathtub what looked like a vertebrae and a liver. Now, why is that important? It's important because you don't just have one individual who's saying, I found a liver, meaning the fire marshal. You have somebody that corroborates that, Mr. Cipriani. The reason that becomes important is because Mr. Morris never told anybody. On that day when he found it, you have a prosecuting attorney that's there. You have all these individuals, including the mom and dad. You never tell anybody that you found this liver. Now, years later, the family hires a private investigator and they take this liver and they take it to a coroner, and the coroner says, well, that ain't a human liver, that's a beef liver, and it has never been subjected to a fire. I guess I'll get into my thoughts about that a little later. But it raises suspicion on this fire marshal, this Mr. Morris, of what's he doing? What's his thought process? He finds something. You're not coming up with any skulls, any femurs, nothing of these 5 missing children. But you come across a human organ and you don't say anything to anybody? Now, if this was a beef liver, the first thing you have to try to figure out, was there a beef cow in that house that burned down? I know it sounds crazy, but this is 1945. That's not so crazy. No. Any other animals that you... No. Okay. Well, how does a beef liver enter into it? You would have to be of the assumption that this Mr. Morse, however unprofessional he is, had to go and find a beef liver in the morning and come and put it in this house fire, and then put it in a box, which he does, he says he does, and buries it in the basement. And you have to try to figure out, if that is true, why? So that's the beef liver, that's the organ, that's in the vertebrae Mr. Cipriani says that he sees. 4 days after they go through these remains, the brother of the Sodder family, meaning George and his wife's, I think it was his wife's, it might have even been Mr. Cipriani, if I'm keeping this right, pushes and dirts and fills in this house, the remains of it, the ashes and everything, because Mom and Dad are convinced in 1945, within 4 days, that this was an accident and that their children died in that fire. And they were going to make that their tomb. They even planted flowers there. Now, some people will say, well, boy, Mr. Cipriani is sure involved a lot in this. He should be considered a suspect. And others will say, well, Mr. Morris, with all of his weird dealings with this liver and it being a beef liver and this and that, he's a suspect. I get that. I get your thought process. But when we start deducing things, well, then we'll know whether, hey, they should really be looked at or not. And I will get into that. So the house remnants are filled in with a bulldozer after no remains are found. You got to remember, this is 1945. Okay. The technology is not like we have now. Mom and Dad are distraught, but they do give statements. The other individuals who made it out of the house give statements, and we're going to get into that as well because they're telling and they're very important. But let's look at now the evidence. Whether you have a crime scene or not, you don't know that at the time. So you have certain things that raise red flags that could be evidence. Now, one of the things is that telephone wire was cut, and they found that on the outside of the house. So later on, I mean, obviously that could be evidence, right? That's could be evidence of murder, could be evidence of kidnapping, of somebody saying, hey, we're going to commit a crime inside this house, and we don't want the occupants of that house being able to call for help. So you cut the phone line. Think of 1969 with Tex Watkins, Tex Watson, cutting the phone cords to Sharon Tate's house in the Manson murders. Very common. Okay, so we have to figure out why that's done. Investigators do a good job. They locate the individual whose name was Lonnie Johnson, who was a neighbor who came to help, although there are some red flags, and he is a suspect in this as well, and people point to him as a suspect. He admits, I cut those wires. However, in the report that I read from the assistant fire marshal, he stated Lonnie said that he cut the phone wires, but he couldn't have because they were 14 foot up and 2 feet from the house. He would need a ladder of some sort to do that. So why is he lying? Or is he lying? The ladder is another piece of evidence. Mr. Sodder said there was a ladder always leaned up against the house. And in fact, when he ran out of the house when it was on fire to reach the children up in the window, although he says nobody saw any of the children up there, the ladder was gone. So where is the ladder? If I am not 100% sure of this, but I'm relatively sure that in 1945 they did not have retractable ladders. So for it to reach up to the second floor, it has to be quite long. At least I'm going to say 10 foot, maybe 12 foot. Does it just disappear? Was it ever located? The ladder is suspicious. However, you say to yourself, well, who would steal a ladder? Well, I don't know. Maybe a ladder was very, an important part of the workflow of a farm, and maybe somebody needed it. They would need a truck, more than likely, unless they lived nearby and nobody really lived that close to the Sodder farm. They would have to have a truck to order to take it. Or maybe it was just misplaced. Doesn't seem like anybody asked Mr. Johnson, who cut the phone cord, what he used to do that. Now, the reason I ask that is because Mr. Johnson was arrested and charged with stealing property, some chain blocks from the Sodder family house. Now, he admitted to it, which I would give him, credit for that. He was there to help, put out the fire, look for remains, whatever it was. He saw a set of chain blocks. He says, in a bad rush of judgment, I took them, I threw them over an embankment, and I came back and got them the next day. And he was arrested for it, and he admitted to it. So could he have stolen the ladder that he had moved to cut the phone wire? I think that is more probable than not, if the ladder is indeed missing. Another thing that I want to address, because I am not a fire marshal, I am not an arsonist specialist, they could not determine what started this fire. There has been speculation, including from the family, that a Molotov cocktail which was thrown at the house, maybe because of George Sodder's political beliefs. Because remember, Mom said, I awoke because I heard something hit the roof of the house. However, I think that we could really get rid of that notion because of her own testimony and statements that says, listen, the fire was in the office by the phone. If a Molotov cocktail was thrown on the top of the house, the roof would be the first thing that was on fire. Am I correct in assuming that? High winds were reported, and it's annotated specifically in here. I think that it's more probable than not that a limb would probably is what fell on the top of the house, and that is what the mom heard. That's just my opinion on that. Fire officials say they don't know, but they think it was electrical. Hey, same thing happened in my house fire in 1980 when it burned to the ground. They did not know. So in 1945, is it suspicious that they could not determine it? No, because you fast forward 35 years later, 1980, they haven't advanced as much. They still can't determine all the time what started a fire. Ours was said to be faulty electricity as well. Somebody didn't come and burn down my house. I know that. So we can't learn anything from the fire departments determining what started this fire. It's very important to note that between 1945 and 1947, George Sodder and his wife were content with knowing that this was an accidental fire and that their 5 children did not survive. The parents apparently looked at a magazine where they thought that a child in there looked like their deceased child that was still alive and living in Florida. And there was a big investigation into Cipriani's and individuals living in Florida. Basically, it came down to the parents felt the kids were kidnapped. And remember, from 45 to 47, everything was good with the family, meaning they accepted things. But come 1947, they started questioning things. Now, I'm going to get right back to the grief and going forward, like I said in the beginning. I see this with parents all the time. I give an example a lot of a senator that hired me to look at his daughter's case, who it was determined she had taken her own life. He didn't believe that. He believed that she was murdered. And I've never seen a clearer case of someone taking their own life than I did here. They, left a note and everything. But he would not accept that, to the point where after I showed him my findings and he disagreed with it. Remember how I said in the beginning about how people are biased and you can't convince them otherwise, no matter what you show them. He became agitated with me. Listen, you hired me. This is the findings. I have all the utmost respect for you, and I have empathy for your situation, but this is what I found. They just won't accept it. So if the Sodder family in 1947 is not accepting this, or they start questioning, there's nothing wrong with questioning it. Nothing at all. And when they don't look at things rationally, I don't blame them. Especially 5 children. not only do they have grief, they have survivor's guilt. Much like the Idaho murders, where the roommates have that as well. Where, why them, not me? Leonard Skinner plane crash, Alan Collins and Gary Rossington, sitting in between people that died in the plane, but they survived. Why? And they had that survivor's guilt. I get it, and I understand it, and I empathize with it. But it's my job as an investigator to look at the facts and give my expert opinion. So in 1951 maybe, the Smithsonian Museum was contacted to look at some remains that were unearthed through another digging at this site, because they found bones. So they were taken to the Smithsonian, which performed tests, and they indicated some of the bones there were in fact animal bones. And I want to get to the paperwork that says this, because they were all found in the basement. Obviously, these bones were found, and this was in 1949, not 1950 or 51, as I stated. There were 8 fragments of bone found in the northeast corner of the basement. All these were animal bones. However, there were human lumbar vertebrae found in that basement, with the approximate age of that person being 14 to 15 years old. They did not show evidence of char, meaning fire, but human remains were found in that basement. Very little vertebrae of a 14 or 15-year-old. Well, if we go back to the missing children, Maurice is missing. His age is 15. Now, if the Smithsonian report would have said there were vertebrae found, but the age of the individual was 29, I would have a problem with that, right? Because that doesn't match any of the missing children. But 15, it matches right on. Smithsonian says, hey, this vertebrae is for a 14 or 15-year-old. That's what we can tell you. Well, there's a 14, 15-year-old child that's missing that was in that fire. So when people say there were no human remains of the children found, I question that. Now, there is this narrative out there that when I believe it was Cipriani again, whoever filled in that basement with dirt and covered it over and they made it a tomb, he could have scooped up bones and put them in there. Now, animal bones, I would say yes. You're telling me that unbeknownst to this family, there were human remains buried around there, and there's no indication of that. And he just happened to get the vertebrae in his front loader and dump that in there, and that the remains that were found in the Sodder family house wasn't even a Sodder family member. Come on. Now you're venturing too far into crazy land. Okay? No. So, were the remains found in the Sodder family home? Yes. Let's get rid of the narrative that there wasn't. I, being a layman, as for fire and fire investigation, would expect to see a lot more remains if 5 children died there and were burned up, as you are probably thinking too. Okay, well, we'll get into that and our thoughts on whether that is true or not. But what I really want to talk about now is the statements and the kidnapping of these children. If you think back to the beginning of when we first started discussing this, and I said the only outcome is that the children were murdered or burned up in that fire, and because of the victimology, I think we can get rid of murder, especially when you have 9 individuals in that house. And there was nobody that said anything about any conflict in that house. And you have 2 other kids that were upstairs sleeping and they survived. Listen, there was no murder in that house. No indications of that at all. So you have either the children were kidnapped or they died in an accidental fire. Those are the only 2 outcomes and possibilities in this case. So what we want to do is let's look at statements. For me in particular, I want to know, and I was glad that this was in the reports, because I want to know about not mom and dad, not the girl downstairs on the couch. I am the most interested in John or George. They survived and they were upstairs where all these other deaths happened. No one died downstairs, just upstairs. So what did they see? That's what I want to know. So, lo and behold, John is interviewed. And what does John say? What does John say? Right here, and I have it circled. John and George were upstairs, and they were sleeping. John says he heard his mom screaming. I heard my mother yelling. I awoke my brother George, and we went in the other room and shook the other kids. And then we ran downstairs. That's all I need to read. That statement by John solves this case. He went in the other room and shook the children before running downstairs. In a subsequent, same interview, but subsequently later, he says, I am sure I called to my brothers and sisters sleeping upstairs and heard replies from one of them. That right there takes away the kidnapping theory. Most people, I think, it seems like, they believe that these children were kidnapped. And remember, I certainly kept an open mind to that as I progressed through the evidence. But when I got to that statement, because if you look at the time frame, 10:30 they are last seen, they go to bed, everybody's going to bed. 12:30, the phone call happens. and it's a wrong number. But by 1 a.m., the house is on fire. Those children would have had to have been kidnapped. Remember, 5 of them kidnapped. 5 kids from age 15 to 6 between 10:30 at night and 1 in the morning. Now, at night, I don't have a problem with that. But you're telling me in this one small house with a girl sleeping downstairs on the couch, parents in the bedroom, that somebody came into that home either through the front door without being seen, went upstairs where you have all the children asleep, kidnapped 5 of them, left 2 alone. I'm just not going to take you 2 because you're too old. You're 23 and 16 or whatever the age was, but I'm going to take the other kids and we're going to go back downstairs and out. And oh, by the way, now I'm going to set fire to your house to cover my tracks. Or B, the missing ladder. Somebody went up the outside into the girl's bedroom, not only stopping at the girl's bedroom, went over to the boys' bedroom, took 2 boys from there, and then went back down the ladder at night with high winds. Nobody heard anything of these 5 children being abducted. And then, by the way, I'm going to have enough smarts to steal the ladder. Which means I got to have a truck, which means all these kids have to fit in this vehicle. You see how it doesn't make sense. On top of that, not making sense, you go to John's, the 23-year-old, ain't a 5-year-old kid making this statement. You have a grown adult who says, hey, I heard mom yelling about a fire or something. I go in the other room and shake the kids physically. That means they were there. So there could not have been a kidnapping, folks. Now, you can spin this any way that you would like to spin it, but because of John's own statement, there was no kidnapping. Again, I don't even have to really get into the possibility of probabilities because of John's statement. But for this video, I will. So I always get the question, how do you become a cold case detective? Ken Mains, how did you become a cold case detective? Well, I had that in mind a long time ago, over 10 years ago, and I got the answer right here. Mastering Cold Case Investigations, a guidebook for detectives. I wrote this 550-page behemoth for that purpose, because when I was in high school, when I was in college, and then when I became a detective, I wanted to know more about cold cases, why they go cold, why are they unsolved, is it evidence, is it lack of determination, is it perseverance, is it politics, all the above. Well, I set the answer to all those questions in my new book. It's been 10 years of research, writing, jotting down things. I knew that I was going to write this book eventually. And it finally has come to a head where I'm able to actually get it done, get it published by Unsolved No More Publishing, and get it out to you. So who's this book for? It's for detectives. It's for amateur detectives. It's for college students, academia, forensics. The topics I cover in this book, from what is a cold case, victimology, research, crime scene location, criminal profiling, conflict, greed, sex and revenge, possibilities versus probabilities. That is huge in this book. I go through that a lot because that's the basis and foundation of my methodology. Evidence, sketches. Of course, you have affirmations. Why should you listen? Social media, the rule of psychology, equivocal deaths, modus operandi, signature, legal and ethical considerations in cold cases, integrity, involving as a cold case detective, serial killers, missing persons, domestic violence, exposing myths, premeditation versus spontaneous, confidential informants, wrongly convicted, clandestine graves, you name it. I cover it in here. 550-page hardcover textbook. And along with all those topics, I also wanted to do case studies, especially case studies on confessions. Why? Because you can learn so much from confessions. At the end of the book, I go in great detail about killers in general who have confessed, why they did it, and what we can learn. That's always the most important thing, what we can learn from them and move forward and apply what we learned on that case to a future case. So I have all that. I tried to incorporate as much as I could, and there's a lot in there about real life cases that I have worked on and I have either solved or learned something from. And I'll tie that to a specific chapter, along with tips, certain things that I think you should look for in certain areas. It's a great book to learn from. But it's not just for active law enforcement members, private investigators, defense attorneys. Everybody can learn from this book. And that is what is motivated me to write this, is I want people to learn. I am tired of seeing wrongfully convicted people. I'm tired of the politics of district attorneys' offices and state police and local jurisdictions who either don't have the resources to do it or they just pass it off because they don't know how, they don't want to, they don't have the desire, the determination. And all that does is affect the victims and the victims' families. And I see it time and time again. You will see endorsements and affirmations from victims' family members in here who I've worked with in the past because they are the most important people. To pass off what I have learned to you so you can be a great investigator, you can be a great detective, and you can solve cases just like I do. Get your copy now. I'll sign it. I'll get it out to you and start learning. That way we can start solving cold cases together. The possibility of a kidnapping, because the remains of the children were not found, allegedly, you have to entertain. But when we start deducing that, wait a second. It's documented that human remains were found in that house. Not a lot, a couple vertebrae, but they're human. And they're from a 15-year-old. Well, a 15-year-old was missing. So if you deduce that, and then you just use common sense about the kidnapping theory, it just makes zero sense. This was a tragic accident. This was a fire that had horrible, horrible results. But that's why they're called accidents. These kids were not kidnapped. There's no way. You can pick apart things, and that's what, I'm not going to say conspiracy theorists, because I don't believe that that's the case here. There are some, but you pick apart things to fit your narrative. Such as the guy that stole the chain blocks. He cut the telephone wire. Because of those two things, he had to have done it. Well, I will give you, hey, we should look into him and find out why he did those actions. But when you come to realize, what would his purpose be? It would be different if you found 5 kids with their throat cut down in the basement. Okay, well, Mr. Lonnie Johnson, who cut the phone wire and stole these things, he's going to be a little bit more up there on my suspect list because maybe he got caught by these 5 kids stealing and he didn't want to have any witnesses. But that's not we don't have that here. What's he going to do? Set the room on fire, but don't kill the 2 other kids upstairs? When people think like that, it's a shortcut to the truth. And I think that it damages the case going forward. You have to use common sense. Don't look for little things that don't make sense that take your investigation to crazy town. If no human remains, if those vertebrae, and I'm not even talking about the liver, that Mr. Morris did all this crazy thing that the coroner said was a beef liver. I don't believe that. Okay? I personally don't believe that. I think that was from the remains. Whether the coroner could tell it's a beef liver or not, I don't know. Whether he made a mistake, I don't know. That's my opinion. But taking that out of it, taking everything Morris did out of the equation, because that doesn't change things. Human remains were found. If no human remains were found, no liver was found, I would say, okay, we really do need to look a little bit harder at a kidnapping. Okay? Even though it doesn't make sense, what I went through, going up a ladder, taking all 5 kids down a ladder, or taking the kids out the front and then setting a house on fire, serves no purpose. People don't set houses on fire to cover up a kidnapping. They set houses on fire to cover up a murder. So it doesn't make sense. But I will give it to some of the people that believe there was a kidnapping. I would say, okay, if no human remains were found at all, then I guess I will give it its due diligence and look at the kidnapping. I would still come to the same conclusion. There was no kidnapping here. You don't kidnap 5 children from an upstairs bedroom on a cold winter night, leave 2 of them alone, and get out of that house without anybody knowing, and steal a ladder, which doesn't make any sense. Why would I steal that ladder that was used in the commission of the crime? Is it because I got fingerprints on it? Well, how about the stuff that you touched inside? Oh, well, that's why you set it on fire. Really? That's your conclusion? You're going to stick 5 kids plus 1 or 2 people that did the kidnapping, so you got 6 or 7 people in a truck. Remember, it has to be a truck because you're taking the ladder with you in December. With high winds, you throw all the kids in the back of the truck and hope that they stay there. And with this ladder, it doesn't make any sense. But human remains were found. And you have a statement from the 23-year-old sibling who said, yeah, I went in the other room and I shook the kids. What more do you want? All right. So let me go over my notes here. Sodder family, 10 children, Fayetteville, West Virginia. Tuesday, December 24th, going into the 25th, 1945. We went through the timeline. And because of this timeline, it jogged my memory of something I wanted to discuss because I didn't get into it. And the reason I didn't get into it because I'm not an expert on it. But how is there no remains found other than those vertebrae? That's probably what you're asking yourself, and I don't know. All I can say is that fire burned from, at the latest, 1 a.m. till 8 a.m. when the fire company arrives. So that's at least 7 hours of high winds, which was documented in every report, stoking that fire, feeding it oxygen. I would expect remains to be found. More remains than just vertebrae. I really would. But it is possible that it got hot enough to burn bones. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and try to justify it because I don't know. I don't know what the reason is. I'm not an expert. I've looked it up, I've researched it, and you have experts saying, no, you're going to have more remains than that found. But you have others who say, hey, no, I've worked cases where everything was completely gone. No remains whatsoever. Not an expert. But I don't have to rely on that. Because I have the sibling, John, saying I went and shook the kids, which means they weren't kidnapped. Now, some people will say, well, they were kidnapped during the fire. That's the reason I don't argue. Because it's asinine. You're telling me the kids, during this fire, after John goes and shakes them and says, let's go, and then he goes downstairs, yells back up, gets a response from one of them, that during that chaos, somebody's going to climb in and kidnap them without anybody seeing them. You're just grasping for straws. I don't have an answer as to why. I don't know, but I don't need an answer, if that makes sense. I don't need an answer because I know it's possible. Where it is impossible for somebody to come in and kidnap those children like that during a fire. Evidence. The cut telephone wire outside. Lonnie Johnson, the same guy that stole the chain blocks, said he did that. Again, he has no reason to kidnap these children. A vertebrae, human vertebrae, was found, confirmed, 1949. All kids were home except for Joe, who was in the Army. One of the things that I saw that I just annotated here was I saw a lot of typos in the police report and the fire report. An example was they listed Maurice as a female. And they also listed that the mom received the phone call at 12:30 p.m. when it should have been 12:30 a.m. Things like that people will pick at, and say, I'm right, you're wrong because of this, when it's an honest mistake. Although, hey, listen, we all make mistakes. But things like that, there should not be a mistake on. You should be able to identify whether the victim are male or female and the exact time that it happened. The stolen chain blocks. Cipriani seeing the vertebrae in the liver in the tub the day after the fire. That's it, folks. That's all I have on this case. Again, I have the utmost empathy and sympathy for this family. It's a tragedy. But it's not a kidnapping. It's not a mystery. The only mystery is, why weren't there more remains found? That's the only mystery. Doesn't take away there was a fire. That fire was accidental in nature, and these 5 children perished in that fire. Plain and simple. There's no mystery to me. Of all the cases that I looked at, this has got to be in the top 10 of pretty straightforward. After you read certain things, initially when you get it, you think, well, yeah, it's a bit of a mystery. But when you start looking at the statements, and you start deducing and looking at things through possibility and probability, very easy to determine that this was an accident and those kids perished in this fire. And that's not the sexy outcome that people like to hear. They want to hear that it was a kidnapping and these kids were alive. And the family wants to hear that. But for me, it's my opinion, that is not the truth. Truth is, it's an accidental fire and the kids perished in the fire, plain and simple. That's my opinion. I gave you reasons why I believe that. You don't have to believe me. It's just my opinion. So that's it. Thank you for watching. To the family of the Sodders, I got much sympathy for you and what your family has gone through, without a doubt. And I'm very sorry for your loss. My prayers are with you. So thanks for watching. Unsolved No More. Mains out.